Welcome back. All right, so my continuing look, just overview of each team, not season previews, because we're too early in the summer for any kind of season previews. But just looking at how teams are doing, I want to talk about Montreal. Kent Hughes and the rebuild that Montreal's been on, and I think they've done a good job so far. I know there's a lot of debate about drafting Reinbacher, same as in Vancouver. There's debate about Willander, but the Montreal Canadiens, I think, are on the right path towards respectability and making the playoffs. Not this coming season, but they should get better. Now, this past season, they had 68 points, which is not great, but it's an improvement of 13 from the year before. So I think another 13-point improvement to 81, yeah, I could see them getting there. Absolutely. So they're currently over the salary cap. However, that includes Carey Price. And so once Price is on LTIR, that leaves them with $9,890,834 in cap space. The status of Carey Price's knee, I haven't heard anything to say that he's going to play, which tells me he probably doesn't play this coming season, which is too bad. I mean, Carey Price, absolutely a legend in Montreal. But at this point with Montreal in a rebuild, would Carey Price pull them out of this rebuild? Probably not. So the exits from this team, there are some noteworthy ones here in the Jonathan Drouin, who was injured a lot during his time in Montreal. He exits. Belzile, depth forward, replaceable, sure. I'm kind of surprised they didn't keep him around. Edmondson gets traded out, and Gurianov and Tierney both go to the market and sign. Gurianov and Tierney are actually both still free agents. They haven't signed anywhere yet. So I was going to say signing with, and then it's like, where was I going with that? Anyways, Montreal, their lineup, this is a lot of players. There are some teams where I haven't been able to fill up nearly this much. And again, I look and think, well, who might play a couple of games this year? Who might end up playing with them? There are a couple others I wanted to mention as well. So one thing to note with Montreal's forwards is there's a lot of flexibility here. Guys who can play multiple positions. Caulfield is the left winger, though. 46 games played this past season, 26 goals. Caulfield, one of my favorite players, plays with Suzuki, another one of my favorites. And I think as long as Caulfield stays healthy, that will, probably give Caulfield about 40, maybe 50 goals in the season. He had 26 goals in 46 games this year. And for Nick Suzuki, his 66-point season, that may end up being a low benchmark. I think his totals will go up. I know there's people who still don't like Suzuki's contract. I think it's fine. Again, we'll see how contracts look next summer when that salary cap jumps up. Josh Anderson, he can play on the left side as well. He played 69 games this past season. So that's 2/3 of your top line, or projected top line, where one's missed 36 games the previous year and the other's missed 13. So that is a big part of the storyline with Montreal, a team that wasn't likely to make the playoffs anyways, but then you add in all these injuries, and yeah, it's kind of been a disaster. Now, Sean Monahan stays, as he indicated he wanted to during last season. He can play any forward position. Only played 25 games this past season. So Monahan, if he can play 60 games, I think that's a win, both for him and for the team. We'll see how things go for him this year. Kirby Dach played 58 games this past season. It was a bounce-back year for him with Montreal from a couple of rough years with Chicago. He can play on the wing as well. Brendan Gallagher only played 37 games this past season. His contract is really difficult to move if Montreal wanted to move it. But then you add in all the games that he misses with injury, and it just makes it worse. Then you get Alex Newhook. Now, Newhook, he's an addition. He can play center. He can play on the wing. I'll be very curious to see where Marty St. Louis puts him when we get into training camp and we start getting into line rushes and all that fun stuff. Where do Montreal see him playing? Do they see him as a second-line center? Do they see him as a third-line center? Does he end up on the wing? Does he end up on Dach's wing? Do you end up with a Newhook, Dach, Gallagher line? Be interested to see what happens there. You've got Dvorak. There's been a lot of talk about maybe he'd be on the trade market. But he can play on the wing. He played 64 games this past season. Useful, again, third-line center for them. Armia only played 43 games this past season. He can play on either wing. And I do like Armia's work ethic. So hoping he gets to play in as many games as possible this season. You've got Hoffman, 67 games for him this past season. So, again, the projected left side, you've got Caulfield, 46, Monahan, 25, Hoffman, 67. That's a lot of missed games. So, for the guy right beneath Hoffman, Harvey Pinard, he may end up playing a bunch of games this year. Hoffman's an interesting one that he's a veteran. It feels like his most productive seasons probably in the past at this point, but he can still score at a 20-goal pace. Absolutely. We'll see if he spends the whole season in Montreal or not. Evans, 54 games for him this past season. I like Evans, but I think they probably want a couple more goals from him, right? So your third and fourth line production isn't really that key necessarily, but if you have it, it's great. And when you don't, it can be noticeable. You've got Slafkovsky. So one really interesting name is Slafkovsky. He may end up on that second line. You've got Newhook, young forward, may end up on the second line. Definitely going to be curious to see how Montreal puts this puzzle together. And that's without even getting into the guys who I'm not talking about as potentially being in that top four line spot that could be, like Farrell. Farrell, who can play on the wing, he can play down the middle. He's right there. He's impressed. Pitlick, who can play any of the forward positions, probably gets waived, probably gets sent down, and then gets called up during the season. I like Pitlick's offensive side. I know the defensive side might not be fantastic. Then there's Ylönen. I haven't mentioned Ylönen yet. He can play on either wing. Solid, hard-working forward there. Beck is, of course, a player who's got some excitement within the fans and the media of Montreal, wanting to see what he can do at the NHL level. Maybe he gets a shot this year. Pizzetta's there, of course, as well. He can play on either wing. Down the left, you've got Kondata, you've got Heineman, and they've added Lias Andersson as well. He can play in the middle. He can play on the wing. Probably just a depth forward at this point, like AHL side of things. Maillet and Stevens also here down the middle. And then Roy, who can play either wing there for the Montreal Canadiens too. So there's some interesting names on the board for Montreal up front. And there are various ways this lineup could end up. So you can predict whatever you'd like for those four lines. Honestly, it could end up almost any way. But I will say Caulfield, Suzuki, those two together, it feels like that's set in stone. That's the tandem going forward up front. Then you get to the blue line, and things are really wide open here too, in my eyes. Matheson played 48 games, solid performer defensively. If he can stay healthy, that would be really key. Same for Savard. Savard played 62 games this past season. So health is an issue. And then you've got Gooley, 44 games for him this past season. Caden Gooley is a really solid two-way defenseman. You've also got Harris. I like Jordan Harris's game too. And Jack-Eye. It's interesting because, I'm obviously not a fan of Montreal. I'm a fan of Boston. I'm not allowed to be a fan of Montreal and Boston, or they'll kick me out of the Boston Fandoms Union. I already may get kicked out for the fact I cheer for the Canucks and the Bruins. So add Montreal to that, and it's craziness. But this blue line, I like it a lot. You've got Matheson, Savard, Harris, Gooley, Jack-Eye, who hits everything that moves and isn't bad with the puck either. Kovacevic is there. They picked him up on waivers from the Jets. You've got Struble, you've got Norlinder, you've got Bowden down the middle, or on the left-hand side, potentially. And I think there's at least a couple of guys who are right-handed defensemen that probably move over to the left side. Because you've got Weidman, you've got Barron. I really like Barron. Reinbacher, of course, the number 5 draft pick, which we're going to be debating for some time as to whether or not they should have taken a forward there. You've got Mailloux, you've got Keeper, who was picked up. He's AHL depth. Has done that for the Canucks organization for the last couple of years. Now moves over to Montreal. So it's an intriguing blue line. And whether or not this blue line can get that goals against that was 29th last year in the NHL and move it up, we'll see. The goaltending will be, I think, contentious a little bit. In that you've got Allen, you've got Montembeault, you've got Primo. If this team's going to improve, they need Allen to stay healthy and play the way we know he can. And Montembeault needs to continue to show that progression. Sam Montembeault really does look like he may very well be one of those late bloomers in the net. It does happen. Goaltenders can take until their mid-late 20s before they really kick into what they're going to be. And maybe Montembeault is evolving to become a legit starter in the NHL, or at least a legit 1A, 1B, which at times for Montembeault it's looked like might be out of his reach. So I do think there's enough intrigue around this Montreal roster that they will be interesting to watch over the rest of the summer. With this amount of cap space that they would have again with Carey Price on LTIR, do they add more, and where? Like, my question would be if Ken Hughes is out there saying, all right, we're looking for, where are you adding? Are you adding a defenseman? Are you adding somebody on the right-hand side? Or Like, where would you be adding? And so I wouldn't be surprised if the Montreal Canadiens are done for the summer. That would not entirely surprise me. It was said they'd be quiet during free agency, and I mean, picking up Anderson, picking up Keeper, yeah, they've stuck to that. Adding Newhook in a trade looks like it's a pretty shrewd move on their part. This season, we'll see how it goes for them. I do expect them to be better, and maybe with further moves made in the offseason, we'll have more excitement for them coming into this year. But as a Montreal fan, how do you feel about the team going forward? Do you feel like this rebuild's on the right path? How much longer do you think it's going to be before Montreal is a playoff team? Could it happen this year? Could it happen a couple years down the road? Let me know your thoughts. I do think they'll be fun to watch because Marty St. Louis, I think, is a decent coach, and he seems to be able to help the guys have fun. As a player who was in the NHL for a long time, makes sense he'd be able to communicate that, and I look forward to watching him play. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.